Hey YouTube, continuing the conversation or I guess discussion between us, and I guess in particular for me, just a small monologue or talk about this particular subject matter of blades within traditional bushcraft. Now, there's a lot of different types of blades, full tang, rat tail, they have lots of different purposes, Skinner blades, bushcraft blades, blah, blah. Now, this blade right here, this is a Swedish blade, and this is a Baco. Of course, Mora knives. Mora of Sweden makes these knives as well as the Mora knives, which are excellent, and I highly recommend these. But for traditional bushcrafting, these really kind of weren't around per se in this format. And so, once again, a lot of the traditional bushcrafters used various kitchen types of processing knives or bladed edged tools and they modified them, to make their bushcraft knives. And so it was somewhat common to have a smaller blade and also a larger main blade. And it wasn't always like that they were fixed blade types of full tang construction deals. Like this one is a full tang, and I'll take this one out of the sheath, and it's just kind of one of those things that you have to kind of look back in history in your area and your part of the world. And I got subscribers from all around the world. I want to welcome you to the channel again, and thank you for all your support. When we talk about traditional bushcraft here in the United States, this is probably not an example of it. This is a little bit more of a survival knife, but a lot of bushcrafters use this for batoning, and for not really so much of a chopping, but for a lot of whittling and a lot of camp chores. This is a great camp knife. As you can see, I've been doing a lot of batoning on this. This one is made by Ontario Knives. This is the SK5 Blackbird Nori, made in the USA with stainless steel. This uses 154 cm. And of course, this kind of steel was not available back in the traditional day. I just like on some of my knives to be made of stainless steel. This is, of course, a lot higher quality stainless steel than the traditional stainless steel, just to resist rust. But I also have other variants, which I'll show you next. One in particular, it would be a charade. This is the SCHF 36. And this is made out of 1095 carbon steel. And here it is in the sheath. It has a little pouch with a fire steel and a sharpener. There's just a lot of different choices, people, depending on your budget and everything. But there's a lot of these choices, though, that I think you have to just try out yourself. And there's a lot of personal preferences. Sometimes it's just how they look. This is a very beefy blade, very excellent bushcraft knife. This is more of a bushcraft than a survival knife, in my opinion, more of a woods knife. And I mean, definitely it's set up for survival as well with the sheath system. But I have to say, though, there's a lot of hybrid knives that are out there that work on the principle of being both survival and bushcraft. But in terms of the traditional bushcraft, they were much more simple. They tended to have like a wooden handle, several rivets that are pins through, and they were typically either like between half to 3/4 tang. And once again, they used high carbon steel. And that's just kind of what the tradition was, from my knowledge. And they made use of that. And a lot more kind of basically modified knives from other types of specific uses, such as, like I said, kitchen. There's different kitchen and meat processing knives that were modified into bushcraft knives. And so you're going to have to decide on what meets your needs, what size you need. There really is no such thing as, this one size fits all. And that's just how it is. There's thousands of blades of different sizes. And for some people, they just want to carry one blade. Some people, they need that backup blade. They don't want to put stress on their main blade because they may have to be pushed into a situation that they might have to use it as a spear. And you definitely don't want to use your primary blade tied to a stick, being thrust into the water that could be broken or lost. There's some of those kind of rationales that makes a lot of sense. Now, I didn't talk about this particular thing, this file, or a sharpening system, in the last video that talked about axes, hatchets, and so forth. But a file or even some type of small sharpening stone. You could definitely go with a smaller variation. Really is a pretty decent thing to have for bushcraft. It may not be 100% totally what you consider traditional, but I do believe there was variations of this. Not so much in the very early pioneering days, but I do believe there was a lot of growth in this particular ideology of how to sharpen your blades. And I know that for a lot of people, especially in today, it could be something as simple as a nice tool steel file, a metal file to sharpen your blades. Now, for your primary knife, though, you may not want to be using something that crude. A ceramic rod or a ceramic stone or something like that could be a lot better to hone the blade and, of course, to strop it with your belt. But these are just some examples. And so when we talk about, our fixed blade and our secondary blades for bushcraft, we want to be mindful that we have certain purposes for that blade that make it a bushcraft knife and not a survival knife per se, or not a specific type of knife that would be used just for skinning a hide of an animal. Not that the knife can't be pressed into a survival or skinning application, but there's a lot more broad implications. It's almost like a general camp knife is probably the closest that I can get to a bushcraft knife, but there's a lot more emphasis on wood processing. Just because of the design of the blades. And if you're getting into this, you'll start to see there's somewhat of a difference, and sometimes a big difference between the mainstream survival knife and a mainstream bushcraft knife. There's a lot more subtle differences, but there's a lot more just form that's done on purpose to give you different results. So, it just depends on your needs in your area. Some people... They really do rely on trying to minimize their weight of carry, just because they may have to carry a lot of other things to survive in that element that is in their environment, such as maybe it's a very cold environment. And so you wear a lot of clothing and you have a lot of redundant clothing, or you have to bring a lot of food because you burn a lot of calories because it's so cold and your body just goes through it. In those situations, things like an axe or a large fixed blade are going to really be in question, because you're going to be like, man, do I really want that extra pound or two? Do I want that weight, that bulk, when I can have more options for warmth, more calories for heat, for my body to generate heat? And so you start thinking in those terms. And that's why we always talk about that ounces equals pounds and pounds equals pain. And if you have enough pain, it can actually, cause a resistance in your ability to perform at the level you want. And so we're just trying to be as efficient as possible. And so what traditional bushcraft did, they pretty much had a very light load. Their haversack was typically their main pack, and they weren't very large. Sometimes they did have like a small makeshift waist pack or a sling pack that went in as a companion to their haversack, but you'd be surprised. They really probably didn't have more than maybe 15 to 25 pounds tops loaded out. I mean, that's kind of what is typical, but it wasn't uncommon maybe to have under 15 pounds, just depending on, the actual purpose and where they lived. Definitely in some very moderate weather, in temperate regions, it's really not uncommon to have some really low weight, systems. Some systems not even using a haversack and using just basically a blanket system sling that they stored all their items in their blanket and wrapped it around their torso. And there were systems like that were very efficient. They kept all the weight to a minimum, kept the weight close to the body, and also let them have complete mobility and without all the hassle and the off balance featuring of having a larger weighted pack that throws your weight off when you move in certain directions or if you bend. As we all know, that's why we try to put a lot of the heavier weight to the center of the body and closest to the body when we pack our bags. That's why bushcraft is so important, because when we couple that with other types of disciplines, such as more like professional ultralight backpacking, we get a really good outline and a lot of answers to questions about how, as preppers, can we strengthen and focus and really generate a more clear, custom answer for ourselves about how to satisfy our needs. And so that's why we continue to talk about these, because the more we know about other brother and sister disciplines that are around us, the more we can actually benefit as preppers, because they really give us a different angle or view of how things can be solved. And that's really the ultimate, thing that we're talking about here is problem solving. The more we can solve the problems of getting our needs met, so we don't have to be forced into a survival situation, the better we are just across the board, no doubt about it. So it's very important to have bladed tools because it's one of the most useful tools of all the tools. In fact, just with a bladed tool, you could get away with just that alone if you have enough skills. I mean, you can make a fire with it, build shelters with it, harvest game. There's if you have that level of skill, and there are people who actually do, it's very rare, but just having a knife alone is enough to get by. And of course, we don't want to just get by, so we want to have some level of redundancy. That's why we talk about the other stuff. But that's what we're talking about today is traditional tools. We'll continue this conversation in the next video. We'll talk about containers. Thanks for watching, and thanks for your support.